Welcome to the 3-minute explainer on principled arguments. We've covered the four main parts of making a principled claim, which is establishing the principle, explaining how it connects to your discussion, explaining why you specifically uphold it and why the other side doesn't, and explaining why it matters in context. Here's one really good example that we're going to go in a little bit of depth in order to explain how this kind of works in some circumstances. The example that we're going to look into is the idea of democracy versus technocracy. And the idea is that the principle of democracy is often weighed against the idea of technocracy, which oftentimes has better practical outcomes, like things like economic growth, as opposed to this being dependent on individuals, which often make pretty bad decisions, such as reducing tax rates even when it is going to be beneficial, because they have their own kinds of concerns that exist. So this means this acts as a very good example of many debates that you're going to have about weighing different kinds of principles against practical outcomes. So in order to establish the principle of democracy in the first place, we can use an intuition on choice and how people often prefer to have liberty in most circumstances to live lives the way they like to do so, even if this has worse outcomes. So why is smoking and drinking allowed despite having bad health outcomes? This is the baseline principle, and once we are able to establish this with some variety of intuitions in this regard, we have some amount of understanding in which we can now build up using. What's the next part of the chain then? Next, we have to explain how the principle connects. A simple one-liner here on how the idea of choice and autonomy is something that is intrinsic to democracy. The idea of you being able to vote and having your view taken in, even if it is maybe not the most educated, because you are an individual which has value within the system, that is fundamentally a connection between this argument on political systems and representation with its original principle of choice and the importance of it. How do we uphold it while the other side doesn't? Technocrats are not elected. There is no effect of you as an individual and every individual on these technocrats. They're based off of just education or other aspects. Fundamentally, there's a difference in either side, and there's like a democratic deficit almost between your side's claims and the other side. So that's how we're able to uphold this principle. This is an easier example, but in more complicated circumstances, this is a very important thing to emphasize. Finally, why does this matter in context? You can explain the lives of individuals. You can say that when they go and put that ballot, when their viewpoints are seen in politicians, when they're passing policy, that is a very, very meaningful effect on individuals. Individuals are the only ones who know what matters most to them. And we think that insofar as they're able to vote and make these things clear, trading off some economic opportunity or chasing some metric is less important than the lives that these individuals lead that they feel represented and beneficial. And that's how we can explain why these principles matter in context, oftentimes by engaging on very basic grounds of practicality, because principles are just an alternative form of weighing these things.